The true ending of Tolkien's masterpiece is filled with libertarian messages. If you have not read the book and do not want to know its ending, do not watch this video now. In the third and final book of the Lord of the Rings saga, by the masterful English writer John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, the ring is finally destroyed almost by divine providence and Sauron at last falls. Frodo and Sam are rescued and honored for their heroic deeds. Aragorn is crowned King Elessar Telcontar, taking the throne of Gondor. He marries Arwen, symbolizing the union between men and elves as well as the beginning of a new era. Well, if Tolkien were an ordinary writer, the book would end there. That happy ending readers had long awaited. But Tolkien was not an ordinary writer. After all the grandeur of the War of the Ring and Aragorn's coronation, the author returns to a smaller local setting, the Shire, and he does so in the penultimate chapter of the work, the Scouring of the Shire. This chapter functions as the true philosophical conclusion of the work. Curiously, it is a chapter often misunderstood or even ignored, despite all its importance. So much so that Peter Jackson removed it entirely from his film, since it would be, in his words, unnecessary and anticlimactic. Even with all the trash produced in the new series and films based on Tolkien's work, adapting this chapter has never even been considered. But after all, what does the Scouring of the Shire tell us? Well then, after the defeat of Sauron, who was the ultimate personification of absolute centralized power, the author shifts the axis of the narrative to a much subtler and more dangerous kind of domination, the gradual loss of local freedom. And he does this by returning to the Shire, that bucolic place in Middle-earth inhabited by hobbits. Thus, the Scouring of the Shire recounts the return of Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin home after the War of the Ring. However, instead of the expected peace, the four hobbits find a completely disfigured Shire, subjected to arbitrary rules, constant surveillance, and widespread poverty. The so-called ruffians control the villages and roads, confiscate property, restrict trade, and govern in the name of a mysterious chief called Sharky. Chaos has taken hold. Trees have been cut down, houses destroyed, and everyday life has lost its traditional simplicity. The friends, now transformed by the journey of the ring, realize they cannot simply resume their routines. Evil did not remain far away, it settled at home. Victory against Sauron did not guarantee local freedom. Shock experienced by the four hobbits is not merely material, but moral as well. They realize that the Shire's submission did not occur through external military conquest, but through accommodation, fear, and the gradual acceptance of unjust rules. Many hobbits obeyed because they believed it was the new order, or because they hoped to avoid trouble. This detail is crucial. Tolkien shows that tyranny is often established not through absolute force, but through the slow erosion of individual responsibility. Merry and Pippin, especially, recognize that their experiences outside the Shire made them better suited to lead a revolt against the situation. They learned that legitimate authority does not arise from decrees, but from recognition, consent, and the active defense of the community against abuses. The regime imposed by Sharky and his henchmen is essentially a microstate, with fees and taxes, absurd rules, unjust punishments, confiscation of goods, and restrictions on peaceful activities. In other words, socialism. None of this, of course, improves the hobbits' lives. On the contrary, it generates scarcity, fear, and environmental decay. Tolkien makes it clear that the supposed authority of the ruffians has no moral basis, only a coercive one. The Shire under Sharky shows us that all it takes is for a group to arrogate to itself the right to command, legislate, and punish in order for oppression to arise. Moreover, the author makes it very clear that this oppression only persists because the vast majority of hobbits passively accept absurd orders. Thus, Tolkien emphasizes that one of the most solid pillars of political domination is blind obedience. At a certain point in the chapter, it is revealed that Sharky is none other than Saruman, the great wizard seduced by the power of the One Ring and defeated by Gandalf. This revelation of Sharky as Saruman is symbolic. Once a grand wizard, he ends as a petty tyrant, administering regulations, sheds, and lists of prohibitions. His power no longer comes from intellectual greatness or strength, but from bureaucratic control. He creates nothing, he merely redistributes, forbids, and destroys. In other words, Saruman becomes a politician. He no longer has any elevated purpose and exists solely to exercise power. Unable to produce, he governs through resentment and coercion, diminishing everyone around him to feel relevant. And again, all of this is only possible because of the hobbits' passivity. The reaction to Sharky's rule does not come from an alternative central authority, but from the spontaneous mobilization of the hobbits themselves. Merry and Pippin organize the resistance based on community ties, local knowledge, and voluntary willingness to act. There is no Shire state rising again, there are neighbors defending neighbors. The climax of the resistance is the Battle of Bywater. It is not a traditional war, it is the expulsion of political parasites, if you will pardon the pleonasm, who produce nothing and merely impose arbitrary rules. From a libertarian perspective, this moment illustrates the idea of self-defense and emergent order. When they decide to act, ordinary people are able to restore peace without someone imposing what to do upon them. That is, without coercion, without bureaucracy, and without central planning. When Sharky, that is, Saruman, is defeated, most hobbits want him executed. It is a vengeful and understandable stance. However, Frodo rejects it and prevents Saruman's summary execution, not out of naivety but from a deep understanding of the moral cost of violence. He knows that a victory achieved through the total destruction of an already defeated enemy leaves irreparable marks on those who carry it out. Frodo recognizes that killing Saruman in that manner would not restore the Shire nor heal its wounds, yet Tolkien does not romanticize this choice. He emphasizes that its price is high. Frodo is mentally shattered. He helped save the Shire but can no longer fully live in it. Mercy here is neither cheap nor comfortable. Along with Gandalf and Bilbo, Frodo eventually departs from Middle-earth. Besides Saruman, another character who appears in this chapter is Grima Wormtongue. He had been a member of King Theoden's court. Officially, he was the royal counselor, but in practice he was an agent of Saruman, poisoning the king with half-truths and fear. After his fall, Grima follows Saruman and ends up reduced to a state of humiliation and servitude. In the Scouring of the Shire, Grima is the personification of the servant of power. He does not rule but enables tyranny, obeying orders in exchange for minimal protection. It is Grima who kills Saruman, emphasizing the inherent instability of relationships based on coercion. Soon after, he himself is killed. Their tragic end shows that structures of coercive power self-destruct, for they create no genuine loyalty, only temporary submission. After the Scouring, the Shire is rebuilt without decrees, bureaucracy, or 5-year plans. Each hobbit contributes according to his abilities and resources. Sam, with Galadriel's gift, helps restore the fertility of the land, but the process is decentralized and organic. All of this reinforces the libertarian position that prosperity arises from voluntary action and free cooperation, not from policies imposed from above. Tolkien, who incidentally was a libertarian, suggests that the natural order of things returns once coercion is removed. It is no coincidence that the Shire's recovery is swift. All those artificial obstacles, control, rules, confiscations were removed. Central planning disappears, the right incentives align, and resources are allocated ethically and rationally. Both the beginning and the end of the saga, the Shire functions as a nearly libertarian society. Without a central government, with informal social norms, respect for property, and minimal external interference. The chapter discussed shows the contrast between such spontaneous order and the distortion caused by imposed authority. Tolkien does not idealize the total absence of conflict, but he makes it clear that the Shire's problems arise when someone tries to organize other people's lives. The libertarian lesson is evident. Communities function best when people are free to live, produce, and trade in peace. In short, the Scouring of the Shire is a powerful moral conclusion to the saga. The struggle for freedom does not end with the defeat of a great enemy. The fight against tyranny continues at home, without concessions and without blind obedience.